expert on this topic is Jamie Lingham from Absolute Immigration, one of our new members based in Melbourne. As a backup as well, as Jamie is out touring Australia, which is a very good opportunity in this time and day. We have also Belinda Mann, who is director for Absolute Immigration. As a moderator, we have Micke Dahlgren from Alfa Laval, and Micke is also a member of the SACC board. Back to Jamie. Jamie is the global immigration leader and founder of Absolute Immigration, and Jamie has 20 years of experience working in overseas immigration and relocation area with different organizations, both large and small. He has undertaken significant compliance projects for state government departments, multinational organizations, and SACC-listed companies. As I mentioned, he's currently traveling around Australia with his family and becoming an expert in working and leading remotely. And you are joining us today, Jamie, from Western Australia, aren't you?
Yep, that's correct. Absolutely. Camilla, thank you so much for the introduction. Good afternoon to everybody on the webinar. I am coming to you from Shark Bay in Western Australia, which is halfway up the west coast. I am living the dream that I think a lot of people want to move to Australia to experience. I've packed up, given the lockdowns in Melbourne last year, we bought a camping trailer. I packed up my 3 kids. We put them, I've got my kids are 10, 7 and 5, and we are touring, as you like to say it. We're living the sort of Australian dream. We're driving across all of Australia. We've driven about 12 to 13,000 kilometres in the last 8 weeks. So it's been quite substantial. I mean, it's obviously such a vast country. Internet access has been intermittent, but we still make time I make time to do things like this, and it's quite interesting getting away into the country and speaking to particularly people in rural and remote areas, the skill shortages that they have, the problem that closing our borders has had on our economy. Passenger arrivals are down by 99% into Australia, and as many of you on the call would know, there's no simple way to bring people across from overseas, and more importantly, there's no simple way to go home, which is obviously a major issue for a lot of people. We have not only business people but also family people who want to return to Europe to spend time with their families or visit relatives, and in many cases these people are being denied. So it is, I suppose, we've become perhaps a little bit more relevant. I know that immigration has been relevant for a long period of time, but I think given the fact that the passenger arrivals are down, I think it's from this week is about 3,500 passenger arrivals allowed into Australia, and people competing. There's still 40,000 people caught, Australian citizens and permanent residents caught overseas, and now with Sydney in lockdown and Melbourne announced a 5-day snap lockdown, I mean, look, business still needs to go on. Machines still need to get fixed. Things still need to happen. And if we can't replenish people or staff into Australia, it's obviously going to mean it's very, very difficult to do business. So that's sort of a quick overview of where I'm at. And I suppose that, it's the learnings that are going on through COVID in relation to remote work for calls like this, for Zooms, which have actually been the sort of silver lining on COVID and giving, people the ability to work remotely in somewhere that isn't coming into the office every day. So that's quite good. Now, Camilla, do you want to put up the slide, or would you like me to put up the PowerPoint to share screen?
I've got it here, so I'll share that now.
Perfect. Yeah. And what I'll do today is I'll go through 4 main areas. We just thought, well, what's going to be the most relevant at the moment for companies and to a point to individuals. So I think first and foremost is understanding the current immigration landscape. So what's the government's opinions? What are they looking at visa-wise? And how are they managing the current population, both in Australia, but also people who are stranded outside of Australia? talking to the strand outside of Australia, we're having a look at the travel exemptions. So how do people get exemptions to come in? Because, you know, pre-COVID, it was let's apply for the visa. The visa's granted, jump on a plane, come straight across, and that was it. Now it's, can you apply for the visa? Will the visa get processed? Are you onshore? Are you offshore? If you are fortunate enough to get the visa, can you actually get a travel exemption? And then I suppose I won't say the nail in the coffin, it sounds a little bit negative, but the cherry on top, I suppose, is the fact that can you get on a plane? And so, you know, there's complexities there. So we'll talk a bit about travel exemptions to enter Australia. One thing that's come off, it's come up is the fact that, you know, we've got a lot of clients who are finding it difficult to leave Australia. I mean, it's one thing to say, okay, you know, we're shutting our borders for people coming in, but what about people going out? And also, you know, if the people do go out, how do they come back in? You know, there's obviously that fear that there'll be a lockdown somewhere or that you won't be able to travel. So there's a whole lot of uncertainty around, you know, how this is managed. And today we aim to, Belinda and myself aim to sort of clarify a few of the, I suppose, misconceptions that people might have. And then what we'll do is we'll finish off with predictions over the next 12 months, because I think having an understanding of what we can look forward to will help people, so companies, mobility coordinators, HR professionals, recruiters, etc., start to put in the long-term planning, because with COVID, you can plan today and that plan is redundant tomorrow. And I think that, you know, the way the current environment in Sydney and what's happened in Melbourne is a classic example of that. I was talking to a client today, and she runs a large pub group, and she said, look, we don't know, this is before the lockdown was announced, she said, we don't know what food to order for the weekend. We've just opened kegs in the pubs. Do we have to throw them out? So there's a whole lot of things that they have to be able to pivot quickly. And obviously there's a lot of wasted money. So just going into the current visa landscape, as I said, passenger arrivals have gone down from about 32 million people coming in and out of the country to currently 3,500 a week. And so if you look at that prorated, that's what, 150, let's call it 300,000 to 400,000 people coming and going every year. So that's a significant drop. We're about 1% of the passenger movements. Now, the government obviously took a very hardline approach when it came to COVID. It was a very protectionist approach that looked after Australian citizens and permanent residents. And because of this, a lot of overseas foreign nationals decided to get up and return to their home country, or they actually want to return to their home country just to see people through COVID. And what happened with a lot of temporary visa holders, you know, we're talking visa holders who had leases, who had pets, who had, you know, cars, who had every lifestyles in Australia, they left and they weren't allowed back in. And so the government's, interestingly enough, I remember at the start of the pandemic, I had a call from, you know, one of the people in the Department of Immigration, and it was actually on a Saturday afternoon at 2:30. He said, look, can you put together a paper to talk about how we're going to manage the internal population of overseas foreign nationals? And so I worked with about 6 other immigration professionals that I know through the industry, others who are quite prominent, who run their businesses, and we put together 8 pages of recommendations. There are a number of those recommendations were accepted, but also a number that weren't accepted. And I suppose frustratingly from our side, we felt that the assistance wasn't afforded to overseas foreign nationals. And so the government basically said, if you're a temporary resident, you can use the super that you've accumulated up to a value of $10,000. And we found that companies were subsidising living expenses. We found that companies were giving preference to overseas foreign nationals, could ensure they could work. Whereas obviously JobKeeper didn't come to that level, or didn't come to the party. The government did actually give some relief, and that was through the Red Cross. They gave the Red Cross $120 million that could be distributed through to overseas foreign nationals, but with 2 million overseas foreign nationals in Australia, that didn't go very far. So when we talk about what does the landscape look at the moment, I think that from where we were, you know, 6 months ago, there's big talk on saying, okay, how do we open up travel bubbles? And you can see that New Zealand has been, well, it had previously been quite a successful travel bubble that opened. Singapore was due to be open in July, but they had their own, you know, I suppose another resurgence of COVID, and therefore so that plan was shelved. I anticipate that there'll be other bubbles that are looking at, such as Hong Kong and Taiwan and different countries like that. And so our feeling is that the government is alive to the fact that there are chronic skill shortages, that companies are suffering through lack of available staff. There is actually, I believe it's, and then Belinda, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe there's 41 occupations now on the what's called the priority skilled occupations list who can actually come into Australia and get a travel exemptions. But anyone who's in an occupation who's outside of that list, it's very, very difficult to get to actually come over and get in. And so the government, when they first did the priority occupation list, it was specifically for people in the medical field, for those dealing with COVID, for people dealing with construction projects, large construction projects. And funnily enough, it was actually fruit pickers. There was a skill shortage of 26,000 fruit pickers, and so that was the priority. There's been a number of groups lobbying to change these occupations. And recently, I think about 8-9 weeks ago, there was other occupations put on those lists. So there were chefs put on the list, which I know the hospitality industry had been screaming out for. Obviously, with the borders closing, everybody is doing travel internally. The hospitality industry are struggling for staff because a lot of working holiday makers went home. A lot of student visa holders went home. And so therefore, the pressure on these clients, I mean, we work with a number of large hotel groups, many of whom are only taking 70% of bookings or 60% of bookings because they physically don't have the staff to cater for the demand. And so there is a lot going on, but I think that the takeout for this session, I suppose, from our point of view, is that the government is trying to have a softening of who they'll let in. Previously, they said, okay, we'll have a hardline approach. We won't let many people in. The rationale behind that was not because we didn't have quarantine hotels, but it was because we didn't have the medical facilities to deal with in the event of a breakout, and therefore putting people who weren't Australian citizens and permanent residents, putting them in the mix as well, and potentially taking ventilators or beds or intensive care spaces. So that was the motivation. But as we're going through COVID and realising this has to be something that we live with, that we actually work with, and it's not something that was going to be a 2020 problem. I mean, I don't know about everybody out there, but I certainly had this, it's a 2020 issue, and, I can't wait for 2020 to be over. And, we sort of roll into 2021 and it's still here. Nothing's changed. And actually it's, in some areas with this new Delta variant, it's actually got more difficult. So just talking about, the attitudes, really what we're seeing with our clients is we're looking at, we're bringing in a number of occupations that aren't on that priority skilled list. We are, the government's more flexible when they understand that they are big projects that people are coming through. We brought in recently for a big mining client, we brought in 18 boiler makers who could come and work on a big project, and working on the project would activate 1,000 jobs. So it was a very big project, because obviously boiler makers, couldn't be found for love nor money in Western Australia, and this project had to be completed at a specific time. So we're starting to see attitudes, really change from a departmental level, which is obviously a positive thing. I think that hopefully over the next period of time, we will gradually see that, sort of come to a better position. Now, talking, I suppose, just on that, Camilla, I wanted to just put it out, Mikhail, just to put out to the listeners, just to see if there's any questions just on the immigration climate at the moment, or how the government's feeling about it, or what we're experiencing.
Yeah, that's a great start, Jamie. And I guess we're fortunate that we're in an industry that isn't really suffering so much. I'm in essential services. You're in migration, which has had an increase. But if you are in tourism or travel or hospitality, I mean, we would really be struggling right now. But yeah, it's a really good start. And yeah, I'll open it up to the floor for any questions. You can either type it into the chat box, or, we really want to make this meeting, vibrant and, two ways. So you're more than welcome to open up your mic and video as well, and ask a question verbally as well. But maybe just as I'll kick off the questions on this first topic. So with this updated priority migration skill list, I noticed even accountants are on that. So
yeah, it's amazing.
That's my background. I never thought there'd be too many, not enough accountants. But how, like I think you explained it a little bit. But if you're not part of this list of 41 occupations, you're saying that you can still actually bring someone in that is outside of this list, or what does this list really mean for the migration process?
Mikhail, that's a great question. I think that you know, what we've found in our experience is with immigration, and I suppose with skill shortage, there's always a conversation to be had. I think that people look at how the government operates and they see them very rigid in their thinking and in their understanding of what's happening as far as business efficacy is concerned. And most people that we know, they say, okay, you can only go the priority skilled occupations list. And so we've had a number of experiences bringing in people who are off this list, who are nowhere close to this list. And we're talking, I remember we did a case, we brought in a solar salesperson because there's a massive solar project, billions of dollars solar project happening in Central Australia. And we brought in someone who was a technician and a salesperson, essentially, for a short period of time. As I said, we brought in the Boilermakers. So what we've found is that on the surface, it does appear there's going to be, you know, no flexibility in relation to the priority skilled occupations list. But in practice, we've experienced the fact that the department's been quite open to this, and also looking at different visa pathways. So the priority skilled occupations list has predominantly been for people coming across on business work visas. We're finding a level of success of bringing people over on a short-term visa, so what's called a subclass 400, which is a short-term project, and which has been highly beneficial. So to answer your question, it is the PSMOL, or sorry, the priority skilled occupations list. I can get into acronyms all day.
Mouthful.
Is it the be all and end all? No, that's our experience, and we've just found that being able to tell a story, to show the benefit, the cost.
Have a business case, basically. You know, if
Correct.
you have a business case, then you're creating other job opportunities. The
Yes.
government is not as much red tape as one would think. So you
Exactly.
actually can.
And I had a company the other day, a media company. They said, "Oh, we want to bring in a media person." I just said, "Just forget it. You know, don't even think about it. It's not going to happen."
Oh.
And I always put on the lens of the department. I think, well, hang on, if this job can be done overseas remotely, I'd probably be less inclined to grant someone to come over. If it's a hands-on proposition, there's probably more chance I could.
Yeah. So we've got the first question on the chat already from Lauren. So I don't know if you want to open up, Lauren, and ask the question, or if you want me to read it. But she's talking. Yeah, I'll give her a chance to respond first.
Come on, Lauren, get on the show.
Morning, everyone. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. All the way in South Africa.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. We really do have an international coverage here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I just noticed the market was previously flooded for accountants, and I was very surprised when they were put on the list. So I just wanted to know what the current turnaround times were, and obviously I have a family, if they're able to travel on that visa as well. Yeah.
So look, generally, I might actually just ask Belinda to jump in just on the turnaround times we're experiencing at the moment, and just explain the difference between if you're an accredited sponsor or if your employer is a standard business sponsor. So Belinda, do you want to jump in?
Sure. So the 482 visa, which is your stock standard kind of temporary work visa, for those on that priority list, they're only taking about 1 or 2 months. I mean, it's considerably quick given the circumstances and the climate we're facing at the moment. Anyone on that priority list is really given genuinely fast track processing. And that's equivalent to what a nurse or a doctor or an emergency worker would get. So you're surprised, we're surprised that accountants are on there, but I think what we saw was a mass outflow of accountants when the lockdown occurred. We just lost a lot of people, and we're trying to encourage or entice them to come back. They have always been on that critical long-term list for a 482. There's always been an opportunity to apply for PR as an accountant when you're onshore. So it appears on the list as a priority, and the government's genuinely wanting those on the priority list to come. So they have been fast-tracked. One of the things that Jamie touched on is we're dealing with two different government departments here. We're dealing with Home Affairs that traditionally grant the visa. So you meet the criteria for the visa and they'll grant it. It's the Australian Border Force that manage the travel exemptions. So we're two very different government bodies, one that protects the borders and one that gives you legal status in Australia to either work or stay or remain here permanently. So it's left hand talking to right hand sometimes. Sometimes you can get the visa and you can't get the travel exemption. Sometimes you can get the travel exemption, you can't get the visa. So that's a challenge and the juggle that we are facing. And certainly to Jamie's point, talking about the economic value that you bring in both applications, talking about what we refer to as being a job taker versus a job creator. And something that Jamie can probably talk a little bit more about, but that's something that we, about 18 months ago, looked at. Are you a job creator? You know, can your position in Australia create X number of opportunities for Australians to get re-employed or create new positions? And I think that's been a really good, solid argument for immigration to be able to grant the visa and grant the travel exemption.
And so I guess there's a silver lining in that with the fewer people coming into Australia, there's less applications to go through, right? So 2 months seems pretty quick to me, but that's excellent.
Yeah.
Well, what's also happened though is that there's been a resource rebalancing and allocation of departmental staff across to other government departments. So we actually don't have the number of people processing visas. There's a number of visas for occupations who are offshore that actually aren't being processed. And obviously the ones who are on the priority skills list are being processed. And just to answer the rest of that question, the whole family can travel as well. So once you've been granted the visa, dependents will also be granted. And then from that point, everybody will have to go through and get the travel exemption, which obviously they don't want to break up families when they're bringing them across, which actually leads us, if there's no more questions on that side, obviously being conscious of time, it sort of leads us quite nicely into the area of travel exemptions. Now, travel exemptions, as we said, it's a whole new step. And as Belinda said, there's a whole separate agenda, what Border Force is talking to as opposed to what the department's talking to. So the right hand is not necessarily, moving in the same direction as the left. Now, the travel exemption in Australia, we've had some good success with. I'll be upfront on that, and not just saying because we get quite a few of them. Belinda's sort of found her niche and her calling in relation to travel exemptions. She's done a lot of amazing exemptions. There's been exemptions for family, bringing relationships or people who are with Australian citizens or permanent residents. And some of the ones that I've sat there thought, oh, I don't know if this will actually get over the line. We've got them over the line. We've heard of people making 20 applications for travel exemptions, which is just mind-blowing. I mean, good on them for their persistence. But unlike New Zealand, Australia doesn't charge for their travel exemptions. New Zealand has put a cost to it. I actually did suggest, and a lot of people might not be happy with this, but I did suggest to the department that they put a cost on it, because therefore they could put the attention in and they wouldn't have a lot of people wasting time making exemptions 20 times. I think that sort of stuff doesn't utilise the resources as efficiently or effectively as we can. So what we're finding is that, as Belinda said, we have to go through the whole travel exemption process, and what is, which one do you go first? And so there's two trains of thoughts. Some people say, well, let's get the travel exemption, and once we have the travel exemption, let's apply for the visa. And other people say, once we have the visa, let's apply for the travel exemption. Belinda, do you just want to quickly chime in and talk to what your experience is on this? Because I also get a little bit, confused. I know I have a view, but I'd like to hear your experience on it.
Yeah, sure. It's almost that chicken and egg question, right? Which one comes first? Because do you say to Home Affairs, hey, I've got a travel exemption, Border Force will let me in, now you have to grant me a visa? Or do you go the other way around and say, you know, Border Force, I've got a visa, so you've got to let me in. I've had all my COVID vaccines and all the rest of it. Please allow me to come in and grant me a travel exemption. So typically for 400s, which is that short-term, highly specialised, not ongoing role. So you come in and leave Australia. It's for really project work to come into Australia. We are getting the travel exemption first and then applying for the visa. For a 482, which is that stock standard temporary work visa, we're doing the visa first and then getting the travel exemption. So it really is based on our experience of what has worked in the past and what hasn't. And you'll see the 400 visa processing team, the case officers behind that team, are a lot more in tune with the Border Force Department as opposed to the 482s. And maybe because the 482s are processed in Australia and the 400 visas are processed outside Australia.
Yeah.
Excellent.
No,
I'll jump in with a question already here. There's some coming through the chat box as well. But what if I have to leave Australia for some reason? It could be family or what have you. Coming back in, you know, do I have to apply for a permit to get back in once I've left, or, you know, how does that work in today's environment?
Yeah, so you can. So number one is, can you get out of Australia? That's the first question. I think a lot of people think, as I said at the start of the session, you know, people think I just want to pop home to Europe and I want to see family, or I want to go back for a business meeting, and you know, or I have a sick relative, or I have someone who's unfortunately passed away. What our experience has been is that there's been a number of those people who cannot return or cannot go back to their home country. So it's not as simple as just jumping on a plane and getting over there. So that's one thing to consider, and Mikhail, that leads nicely into our sort of next segment, is actually just talking about, you know, people going out. Or I suppose it touches on a bit, but to your question, it's all provided. The other complexity that's come along is that, can you actually get on a flight? Right, so this is the thing. It's the whole game has changed. The flight is difficult to, you know, the people are getting flights cancelled all the time. They have, you know, airlines will turn around and say, no, we'll only take you if you book business class, which is interesting, because I think that most of us would probably know that in business class, there's not 1.5 meters between every seat. You still get, you know, somebody sit there, there's probably a screen. It's obviously a higher yield proposition for the airline, and therefore it's easier to bring these people across in this class. So as far as coming back as an Australian citizen or permanent resident, you can come back. But if you have a temporary visa, then you'll have to apply for a travel exemption to come back. And as I said, what a lot of people are doing is actually jumping on a flight, going home, and then finding that they're stranded overseas because they were an occupation on the priority skilled occupation list, and they didn't have an Australian citizen or permanent resident partner. So this is the thing. So yes, you can. Will you have to quarantine? Absolutely. If you want to avoid quarantine, I have heard that it will cost you north of $150,000. You'll need your own property. You'll need your own 24-hour security, and you'll need to get the Australian Federal Police who wait at your property. So if you had a big, beautiful farm, Mikhail, just out of Sydney in the Hunter Valley, perhaps, that's what I'd be recommending that you do. But overall, you still have to quarantine. You still have to go through everything that you know, people have to do. So yes, once you're out, it's okay. Coming back in, you don't need to apply for the travel exemption if you're Australian citizen or permanent resident.
What are you hearing about airlines dropping their flights to Australia? Because
and I've seen that from Helene. Absolutely, that's a big problem. There are airlines who are saying it's just actually going to be, it's not going to be profitable for us. It's not going to be realistic for us to actually continue to fly to Australia. And so given this latest reduction to 3,500 people, obviously this is going to be, it'll make it more difficult to fly back. It'll make it more difficult to secure a seat to come back. Currently, there's over 40,000 Australian citizens and permanent residents who are stuck overseas who can't get back. And so, you know, there's a whole, you know, competing group of people who are trying to get back. And now with this latest blow from the government reducing the numbers to 3,500 people, that's going to be a problem. Now, just and exactly. And so, sorry, Helen has just come back and said that there's people, she has a friend stuck in Sweden now. Okay, so, but had no problems at all in September, October. So again, I think that this comes down to the airlines, a big part of it. It's if you can get the travel exemption, or if you're an Australian citizen, permanent residence, obviously you can travel, you know, you have approved travel, but then it's actually getting on the plane. So to me, that's a conversation about the airline. Now, one thing I wanted to actually bring up, because I thought it was quite interesting, and I don't know if anyone else has had this thought or conversation, as I'm sure many of you would. When with the travel bubbles, when New Zealand opened up, a lot of people were just going to New Zealand and jumping on a plane and going back to their home country. They may have been denied to go to depart Australia. And so what they did is they said, okay, we'll jump on a plane, we'll go to New Zealand, and then we'll you know, head back to Sweden, for example. And in the same situation that people would come in, they say, okay, we'll fly into New Zealand, and once we've been through the travel bubble, that we could, you know, quarantine New Zealand and easily fly back. Well, obviously they had to have had a visa to come back to New Zealand, so that pathway was tough. But there was a lot of people who were actually doing that to circumvent the travel exemption process to exit of Australia. But my understanding is, and Belinda, you can chime in here if you like, is that the government said, okay, well, even if you are going through New Zealand, you still had to satisfy the requirements for the Australian departure, and that you could actually face penalties on the way back. Now, I don't think that that's been enacted, but Belinda, did you have any further thoughts on that?
Yeah, we haven't seen any issues with that at this point in time. I think the Australian government cannot deny someone that's gone to New Zealand and then flown out of New Zealand to another country, and then they cannot deny them to re-enter Australia if they're flying from that country directly back to Australia. And that was that loophole that the government were trying to close. But from a legislation perspective or a legal perspective, you know, if once that bubble opened, that gave people the opportunity to fly to New Zealand, and as long as they satisfied the New Zealand immigration requirements, they could then go and on board, en route to another country from there. So I haven't seen immigration flex their muscles about that. And it'd be very, very difficult to monitor and
exactly. Thanks, Bennett. Now, Mikhail, where I'm going with this is I've been thinking about, you know, obviously Swedish companies that might have an office in New Zealand or in Singapore. And so when they do open up these bubbles, is it going to be preferable for these people to come through that route, where they may be in occupations that couldn't necessarily be on the priority skilled occupations list, or be seen to the government as high value? Obviously, at this stage, this early stage of travel bubbles, this is not a tried and tested method. But my view is that I think that if people are going through Singapore, for example, from Sweden, who can manage to secure a flight to Singapore, potentially quarantine there, and then make the trip across to Australia, that could be something that you know, is another tactic that companies can use. Again, back to the 400 visa, when we brought over 18 Boilermakers for a large mining company, those visas were approved and the travel exemption was approved in 2 weeks. So it's you know, I think there's different ways to think about how we can approach getting people in.
Well, first we've got to reduce this cap, right? I mean, how long is this cap in place for?
I think the cap will be in place, I'd say, for a few months, just until they're trying to figure out how this Delta variant is being managed, how people are going through the vaccinations. You know, there's a whole lot of considerations that they have to weigh up to see, well, when are we going to start putting the numbers up? And I suppose with Sydney moving into quarantine and Melbourne now in quarantine, I think that this is into lockdown, this is going to make it a lot more difficult for those cities to open up to travel, because Sydney was the greatest recipient of overseas foreign nationals, of allowing flights back in and getting quarantine. And so it's going to be interesting to see what these latest lockdowns do to those numbers.
Okay.
One of the things I'll mention there is that the caps reduced earlier this year as well, when the tennis open was on in Melbourne, and all the flights came into Adelaide and Melbourne, and everyone took up all those quarantine hotels, and they said, let's reduce or half the number of passenger arrivals into Australia during this time. So we did see this happen before for a number of months until that was all over. I think they kind of put a caveat on it, saying that it's based on the availability of quarantine hotels at that time, because there were several hundred people coming in and we had to stop other passenger arrivals coming in. But look, like Jamie said, that they can make these changes literally overnight. The snap lockdown in Melbourne, these passenger arrivals, and then they just open up overnight as well. We don't get any forewarning before this happens as a migration industry. We just have to go with these announcements as everyone else hears them. So we're hoping that this only lasts for a number of months, because you can imagine this backlog of people that have visas and can't get a seat on a plane. Particularly for 482 visas, the date that the visa starts is the date of visa grant. So if you're outside Australia and you've been granted a 2-year visa or a 3-year visa, that actually starts when you're outside Australia. So you're wasting time waiting for a plane ticket or a travel exemption. And as we move into summer and holiday season towards the end of the year, that's really the busiest time at airports.
And there is a question on the chat box on that from James. Yeah. He's saying, is it easy for an applicant to apply for a visa if they are already in Australia? And this is not specifically to 482.
Look, I think there's been a new COVID visa. It's a subclass 408 visa that we've done quite a number of, and people who are here on various types of visas who don't want to continue with that visa subclass, whether it's a tourist visa or a working holiday maker visa, or a student visa or other types of visas. There are options to move on to this COVID visa if you can't take another visa. Now, the COVID 408 visa actually is, or the COVID stream of the 408 visa has been created specifically for this cohort in Australia. And people who work in specific industries can get work rights on this visa as well. So if, say, for example, hospitality or people to do with COVID, there are a number of areas that people can get work rights, full work rights, and these visas can be granted, for up to 12 months at a time. I think that's the longest I've heard of. But, obviously, as Belinda said, the way that COVID changes, I mean, that could, how the program changes tomorrow is totally different. I mean, let's face it, everybody's competing for 3,500 spaces every week. You've got a business that actually needs to have a technician come to fix a vital piece of machinery. So to me, it's really about, I suppose, having the confidence that, what you're doing and the importance of what's actually happening. So as Linda said before, it's a job creator, it's a job taker. This is something that's going to be beneficial to enable people to continue to work, and therefore once people continue to work, taxes to continue being paid, and we're going to pay for this COVID situation somehow. So the government, I think they still need to understand it. But also one of the things to remember is as Australia is now in winter, this is the high risk time. And so, we can say that coming into October, November, we can pretty safely say that the transition of COVID may not be as great as obviously we're sort of out of flu season, or we might call it COVID season now. I don't know. It's going to be a new thing. I think the flu's been, mostly not eradicated, but I tell you, I don't think there's been many cases of the flu in the last 2 years. So yeah, that's sort of, I think that's, as far as people applying on shore, the government's been pretty open and pretty flexible, because they realise the more people they lose, the less people they have to work in the country.
Yeah, great. Lots of questions coming through. So there's one from Emilio. We've had challenges getting employees with an Australian work visa, been in Australia for 5 years with a Belgian citizenship to work for us in New Zealand. Took months, and we have now lost her to a competitor. Any thoughts of similar cases or advice for future cases?
That is, I mean, look, that's absolutely heartbreaking, is particularly when you've done all the heavy lifting to bring someone across, and paid the significant costs that are associated with visa sponsorship, and then obviously they get up and go. And we're seeing a lot of poaching currently throughout a number of industries of people who are fighting for competition because the talent pool is actually quite small. We've done a lot of work on attraction and retention strategies using non-monetary benefits, and that's particularly through the mining industry. We did a lot of strategic work with companies who were dealing with scenarios that, you know, they would do, people would change jobs in the Qantas Club, you know, they'd be, instead of getting on a flight to go to a Rio Tinto project, they'd sign up a contract at Perth Airport and they'd go off to a BHP, you know, site. So talking to employees and finding out what their long-term plans are, what their intentions are. If they have an intention to get a pathway to permanent residency, can you start to work towards that rather than them going out, if they're not a permanent resident, of course, rather than them going out and finding that information on their own, we suggest is really doing a wellness check-in and seeing how they're actually, you know, how they're tracking and what their plans are. And once you get an understanding of what their plans are, then you can talk to how you can help them towards that. And I don't know the particulars of this case, but if that person, for example, had another employer who said, listen, we'll give you a pathway to permanent residency, and they said, great, that's what I want that sort of security. I'm not sure if it's an Australian citizen and permanent resident. Obviously, there's the choice that they can do it. I think given the power of a pathway to permanent residency and security and longevity in the country, I think that's a pretty strong motivator and tool, and it will help you, you know, sort of retain staff.
Okay. Now that Europe is starting to open up a little bit, at least until the Delta variant takes off in Europe at the same time, there's a lot of talk about vaccine passports and all of that. So one of the questions is around that. So if you have family overseas that is fully vaccinated, you know, what are the chances of them coming out here and getting a visa to arrive to visit family and grandchildren and all of that?
Look, I think that it's quite interesting. I think the vaccine will be a positive. I don't doubt that. I think that the reality is, I think that people coming over for casual tourist visits, I think that's still a good 6 to 12 months, if not more, away. I don't think that we're going to have a return to normal as far as our tourism industry goes. And just, you know, family, friends. I think that the priority will obviously be, let's bring in workers, let's bring back people who can reignite our economy, who can help with the rebound post-COVID. But I definitely think that people who do have the vaccine will be prioritised. I think it will be a consideration. And it's how they come, and the government's actually talking at the moment about allowing people who are vaccinated to go and self-quarantine at home, so bringing that system back. But as I said, I mean, I think that the chances of bringing people over for a casual visit, it is a lot tougher unless they're a partner. You know, are they involved in some sort of level? If it's just a cousin or a parent or an aunt or an uncle, I think that is still going to be a long way down the track. So just having people's expectations managed, I think that's a very important thing to understand.
Okay. And the next one is around that priority occupation list. You know, how often does that get reviewed, and how long do you think that those jobs will stay on that list?
Look, I think that, and Belinda can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was probably a good 12 months before we, you know, it's been 12 months since we had the original priority skilled occupations list. I know that there are a lot of industries who are lobbying the government to get this list changed. But Mikhail, I'll just say that this is what I was explaining earlier. I think that if we're going to wed ourselves to the priority skilled occupations list, you'll always be waiting for that, you know. And as I said, our experience is that we're starting to get people outside of that list. It's really putting the business case forward, and it's putting the you know, I suppose trying to open a dialogue with the department to have that conversation. If it's someone who is going to significantly impact Australia or Australian jobs, or, you know, if they're you know, an individual who can assist with the recovery, then I think that's going to be obviously prioritised. Now, there's one thing that we didn't touch on that I think is very important to introduce, and I know we've got, you know, about 10 minutes left, but there is another visa subclass that was introduced, I think it was 2 years ago, and that is the Global Talent Visa, the GTI visa. Now, the global talent visa is actually a permanent residency visa. And so what we've found is there's a lot of companies who have been traditionally using the traditional 482 visa, but the GTI visas are focused on ag tech, fintech, med tech. I think it's construction, it's infrastructure. There's a number of different occupations. Belinda actually had some great success. She got Belinda, I'll let you talk to this in a second, but I think you got a recruiter, someone who dealt with recruitment in one of the sectors they're looking for and got them through on the global talent visa. And then so what happens if you can get this person through on the global talent visa, and that takes 6 months to process, you don't have the significant cost of what they're going to put them on a 482. They get permanent residency, so therefore they don't need to go through the travel exemption process, and they can arrive in Australia and have a permanent residency visa, which is, I mean, there's a a trade-off in that if someone comes on a sponsored working visa, they are tied to the company. But I don't give it too much weight, because the reality is that you could turn up on a 482 visa, and then exactly like happened in Emilio's situation, you could have someone who poaches that person, and so you've paid a significant amount to bring them across, and as we say, have done all the heavy lifting, and then all of a sudden someone comes through and picks them up for a fraction of the cost of what you paid. So to me, the GTI visa is a great option for people at the moment. And as I said, so if you've got the priority skilled occupations list, it's not our only tool in the toolkit. I always say to people, we have a number of different tools in our toolkit. And it's like if you go to the mechanic and the mechanic says, I have a hammer and a screwdriver. I mean, that's not the only two things that fix a car. And in the same way, there are different ways to think about it. Belinda, do you just want to quickly touch on your successes outside of, sort of traditional GTI stream?
I think I've got someone raising the hand as well. Emilio, if you want to come off mute, maybe it's related to that particular comment.
Sure.
Look, only if we've got time. Thank you, Jamie. Just because I missed with my question, that the point I was making is that it looks like that New Zealand has really become so insular that it's become almost impossible for me to bring someone from our global enterprises, even those kind of specialist roles. And in that particular case I mentioned with a Belgian colleague of ours, she had this particular skill set. There was a great rare mix of highly technical, but also business and executive leadership. And the first time around, I mean, I don't feel we did a great job. So I'll take responsibility for that, because we put it forward as a sales role, and that didn't work, so it got rejected. And the second time around, it took quite a long time to get any response. And we kind of feel that we have about the feedback we're getting from the immigration group in New Zealand is we have about a 10% chance, even though I advertise for the roles and I don't find the right person in New Zealand. I've got a case with 2 global people from the UK and the Netherlands that I want to bring in as country managers, and then to help me grow the business locally, to hire local people in New Zealand. But I find that I've been told I've got a 10% chance of bringing him on board, even though it's taken me 6 months to find a local person. So now I've got to go with, and that's the point I was making. It seems, I don't know if it's only our perception, but I've now stopped even trying to bring in someone from Europe or the States who's already working for us. I've stopped because it seems impossible for me to get them, even at a senior level and a specialist role as well.
Yeah, look, I take that point, and it's interesting. I've actually had a lot of feedback in recent times about how particularly immigration consultants are managing expectations of their clients. And so to go for a 10% chance after 6 months down the track that this is where you're at is obviously not only it's sort of heartbreaking, but it's wasted your time, right? And so it's really about having that candid conversation. I think the second thing is really looking at making sure that you've exhausted all the visa options, because that's the key. I mean, as I said before, you might be told there's only visa A that we can go for, but there actually might be a more creative way that you can bring people across. What I'd suggest, and just given that we've got 5 more minutes, so I've got 5 more minutes of talk time before Camilla has to take over for her general sort of stuff. We have our country leader over there, Arno Nagel. I'd suggest just give him a call, have a chat with him. He's very straight shooter. He'll tell you, he'll say, look, you know, it's not going to happen, or it will happen, or if there's a way it's going to happen, this is how it's going to go. He met last week with the opposition immigration minister. I think he's catching up with the immigration minister. So he's got his finger right on the pulse. And he's, you know, I just think that's what you need to do. You need to have the expectation managed at the start, because to sit there 6 months, you know, you put your life on hold, you put their life on hold. It's not good for anyone.
Yeah, because I had 2 or 3 ambassadors working on it. They still couldn't get it.
Wow.
But anyhow, so Camilla, can I please get the contact, and I will definitely take that on. That'll be great. Thank you, Jamie.
That's right.
Is it okay, Camilla, if can I get it through Camilla, or?
Yeah, I'll just ask Camilla if you want to send it through. I'll just put my details up at the end. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. Thanks.
Mikhail, do you want to?
So a few more minutes. So I think you wanted Belinda. Sorry, I interrupted you there. So
That's fine. Look, I think that what I'll do, I said there's a couple more questions. I probably prefer to get to the questions, but just the takeout from that to me, from my mind, is if there are people who are looking at different alternatives, there are different alternatives to look at, and there are successes that are happening. I think that if you're getting told that then it's not going to happen, that's not true.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so if there are any more questions now that we haven't, this global talent visa, there was one question. Can you actually, would you be able to apply for that while you're already in Australia and you might be on a 482?
Yeah, Belinda, do you want to go on this? Because this is Belinda's had some unbelievable success on this one. I've got to, I mean, without trying to pump up her tires, it's been the stuff that we've been like, I'm not sure it's going to happen. And she's like, guess what? The visa got granted. It's amazing. So yeah, go.
All right.
Yes, absolutely. You can transfer from 482 to a global talent. They'll take anyone in onshore or offshore. Offshore takes a little bit longer. But it's still being processed while borders are closed, and you're a permanent resident, so you don't need a travel exemption at that point in time. Once it's granted and you're overseas, you have permanent residence, so you can come straight into Australia on that visa. For those that are onshore, it happens pretty quickly. It's a 2-stage process though. So you have to go through what's called an expression of interest. And that's basically putting forward your interest to apply for the visa. If the government think at a very high level that you qualify and you're the type of person that they're looking for, then they grant you what's called an invitation to apply. And you've got 12 months from the date of invitation to lodge your formal visa application for a global talent visa. So like Jamie said, we've had a lot of success. People that are on that short-term 482 visa and an occupation on that doesn't lead to PR are stuck. There's a lot of people that have applied twice, and that's your limit. You get 2 + 2, you've got 4 years in Australia, and that's it. There's no other kind of pathway. They don't satisfy a points test. They can't apply for an employer-sponsored PR visa. This is their last chance. And look, we've had a lot of success in that space. So the target sectors are broad. There's about 9 of them on the list. They don't seem to change. As long as you are recognised for your talent in that industry and can achieve a salary or be offered a salary of over 153,600. 153.
I think that's just recently gone up to 158, Belinda. But it's, you know, Mikhail, they are for, I mean, it is for a talented person. But yeah, if you're achieving over that salary, there is definitely a pathway. And you know, the funny thing is, we got a finance person for a medical devices company that we got over the line. Were they finance or sales? Sorry,
they had a medical background, but they were in sales.
Sorry, yeah, that's right. I thought so. And then we also had a recruiter who came across the line. And so there's been a lot of really good, you know, successes. And the government actually does want this to work. I saw a question there about, is it more beneficial to apply? Can you apply in the country? The answer is yes, you can apply in the country and also outside of Australia. So you can do both. I think it's a good alternative for people, and as Belinda said before, who particularly may not have a pathway to permanent residency. I personally love this visa. I think it's quite a subjective visa, which is a bit crazy from my point of view. So I say as quickly you can get on it, jump on it, because if the government sort of decides, well, hang on, I've got one person who decides one thing because that's their opinion, someone else who decides another, there's no real consistency, but it is how well you tell the story. And in our experience, if you pass the EOI stage, it's looking pretty good for the visa.
Okay, excellent. So I think we've tackled most of the questions in the chat box.
There was one there that I saw, Mikhail, sorry, just
Yeah.
from Victoria. She's talking about looking at the people who come in on, there's 2 occupations lists at the moment, which the government in their wisdom said will do a short-term list. So you can have a 2-year visa plus a 2-year visa, then go home. And then they said there's a long-term list, you're higher value, therefore you have a pathway to permanent residency. And so the question is that, do you think this list will change? I don't know. I don't think so. I can't imagine why it would change. I think that a lot of people have been talking about it changing, but I've got to say that I have been wrong in the past in relation to giving student visas full-time work. So I hope it does change, but I think there are other programs that are trying to attract people on the short-term list into, like, such as the regional program, into different areas. So I don't know, to me it's a 50-50. I personally think not, but as I said, I was proved wrong previously, so I'll take,
Well, it's hard to keep up. Things are changing all along, so it's very difficult. So I can imagine the challenge for you guys. But I think this has been a really good session. So I want to thank you, Belinda and Jamie, for this. I love seeing you swapping the flies in the Australian outback. I think that's sensational. That's really adding
the sunset as well, because that's been a move. I'm under a balcony at a country homestead awesome. This is real stuff, right?
Yeah, this is Australia. But yeah, with that, I'll hand back to Camilla, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Mikhail. It's been great.
Thank you very much, and I'll just put up. Thank you so much, Jamie, and also thanks to Belinda and to Mikael. So here are the details for Jamie. I can copy it into the chat as well. Very, very informative. I think we could have a longer time on this topic, actually, with all the questions coming in. So
we can do it again, Mila. Let's do it again down the track. Thanks.
Yes. It's always changing, and it's always changing as well. So,
absolutely.
So just quickly highlight a few of our upcoming events. We do have events happening in Western Australia. So if you're near Perth, Jamie, there is a Christmas in July event next week at the Fika Swedish Kitchen, which is a new setup. Fika started, they're also a member of the Chamber, and they started in Manly in Sydney, and then the second cafe in Bondi, and now they also open up in Perth. And then we have in Melbourne, I'm hoping we can still run this. It's the 27th of July. We're doing a pre-movie networking event where we also have invited Australian film director David Redman to come and talk as well prior to this movie, which is one of a Scandinavian film called The Exception, and that's on the 27th. Fingers crossed we are able to host that event at the Como, Palace Como Theatre. We have also another, it's a monthly, bi-monthly, event also in Melbourne with the Nordic Chambers at the Denmark House. So don't miss that for everybody based in Melbourne. 2nd of September, we're running an online event with Swedish economist Claes Eklund, and that's organized together with all the Swedish chambers in Asia Pacific. There will be more events coming up as well, and we are planning quite a few now due to all the lockdown in Sydney and so on. There will be more online topics. We do welcome members to inform us and come up with ideas of certain topics, and we will definitely try and work on those. We have also opened up the entries for our Business in Australia Awards, and you can apply online on the SACC website. We are hoping to hold this event, which is an annual event, in Sydney on the 24th of November this year. Another other news are the SACC and Young Professionals Business Mentorship Program, which is also open for the applications now. And you can also find those online. We are inviting mentors and mentees. And this is the second year we're running this program. So that's all I have in the pipeline. So thank you very much for joining us this afternoon, evening, and stay well and stay safe, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Very good. Thanks.